These two over here, they're going to be making sure that we're investing in American energy, that we're doing everything that we can to combat the threat of climate change, that we're going to be creating jobs and economic opportunity in the first place. They are going to be a great team. And these are some of my top priorities going forward.
The annual cost of regulatory compliance, $1.752 trillion. President Obama has issued $216 billion in regulations since 2012. The federal government will spend $59 billion in enforcing regulations in this fiscal year, and regulatory agencies employ 283,600 full-time staffers. Charles, the introduction there was brief, but it's hard to overstate the importance, perhaps, of especially the EPA and how the president views the rest of his term.
Well, I mean, we have had a sort of explosion of regulation under this administration. We're going to have tens of thousands of pages of regulation in health care because of Obamacare, many of which haven't even been written or thought through. We're going to have the same with the regulation of Wall Street, which leads to incredible uncertainty, to actually gives leverage to the strong the private interest that can lobby and shape the legislation. So it creates a system where you're crippling the economy. That number that you gave is it's more than $1 out of 10 out of the entire economy. And what we saw with the school lunch program, a lot of it is do-goodism. I predict that the result of these standards on what snacks the kids will be a mountain of uneaten food. You can bring a horse to fruit juice, but you can't make him drink or something like that. And the kids are going to be sneaking Snickers between the chain link fences outside the school. In Britain, that's actually happened. It's a result of kids simply on strike, essentially, on this stuff. And it's going to add 1 million hours of regulation. Is that what you want at a time when people are worried about the failing standards in schools? I'm not sure.
I can't believe Charles compared school children to horses. I'm outraged on behalf of school children all across the country that you would do that.
On behalf of horses? They're infinitely more disciplined.
Well, everybody likes fruit juice, so at least we agree there.
But the real irony is that if you're really serious about carbon and carbon emissions, you would support the bonanza of natural gas that we have had through no work of our own. It's simply lying on the ground, and we have the means of doing it. Fracking. And the EPA has been edging over to a position where it wants to regulate that, and the more you regulate it, the more you shut it down. In New York State, for example, it's essentially shut down. That is the way to reduce carbon because it produces half the amount of carbon of coal, which is the major producer of electricity. So it'll be interesting to see how sincere they are about climate change, or do they simply want to kill all of the fossil fuels?
Do you think that President Obama, through Gina McCarthy, wants to have his legacy that they killed coal?
I think that's already a fait accompli. The regulations are already in place, make it impossible to open a new coal plant, and will shut down about half of the others by the end of this decade. The real issue is, are they going to do the same to natural gas? And that's why it's encouraging that the Energy Secretary nominee is, at least apparently, he supports it.
It is paramount, essential, urgent that the Egyptian economy get stronger, that it get back on its feet. There has to be a sense of security, and there has to be a sense of economic and political viability.
Today we're launching the Egyptian American Enterprise Fund with an initial installment of $60 million in U.S. government capital now, rising to $300 million in coming years as we work with our Congress on funding this and other programs. And in light of Egypt's extreme needs and President Morsi's assurance that he plans to complete the IMF process today, I advised him the United States will now provide the first $190 million of our pledged $450 million in budget support funds in a good faith effort to spur reform and help the Egyptian people at this difficult time.
Dear brothers, we must not forget to nurse our children and grandchildren on hatred toward those Zionists and Jews and all those who support them.
But if you are going to engage, and I think that we have to, The mistake I think the administration is doing is having the engagement and the money and the support hinge on economic reform and not on political reform. The economic reform, as Kerry said, he had to urge the Egyptians to actually go ahead and to request the money from the IMF. That isn't exactly an economic reform. I don't see why it's a concession to us. But the economy in and of itself is not a U.S. interest. The only U.S. interest is in the nature of this government. It's a government that won the election, but narrowly. It's suppressing journalists. It's suppressing the opposition. The opposition is boycotting the upcoming elections as a result of the fact that it's being suppressed. And we ought to be demanding political concessions as a reward for any kind of money and not economic concessions. It's an elementary idea, and I don't understand why the administration doesn't see it. It's our leverage. We have to use it. You don't want to lose Egypt. You don't want to disengage, but you don't give them a free hand to do anything they want and simply say, well, he was elected, so I have to accept everything he does.
There are increasing numbers of people out there who look at our financial system, our financial situation, and say foreign aid should be among the first things that we look at off the top, because they say, especially the countries that don't like us particularly, we should look at that first. There are many arguments on both sides of that. Your thoughts?
Look, I believe in that, and if you have a country that's resolutely anti-American, I wouldn't give them a penny. But Egypt is in play. It's got a government that has a history, or a regime that has a history of being anti-American, anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, etc. But it isn't a fait accompli. Egypt still is a society that could go either way. Elections are coming. It has a very strong opposition that was out there in the streets. Again, it came a close second in the election, so I wouldn't concede it. I would support it, but only on condition.
This has been a Sunfish production.